Hi, good morning, everyone. How's it going? It's me, Ursula. It's been a couple weeks, but I'm happy to be back today. Um, I am going to be working with oil paint again, and therefore I have my windows open, I have my door open. I don't like visually how that looks. Kind of, I don't know, something about that doorknob is throwing me off, but yeah, I want to have as much ventilation happening in my studio today. So, like I said, windows are open, doors open. I would have the fan going, but it is kind of loud, so I don't have that on. But yeah, if you work with oils in the future, always have some kind of draft ventilation or like a fan, something set up, um, because it can really knock you out. And I don't know if anyone's ever worked with oils and didn't open the window. Maybe it was freezing, it was winter, and you didn't want to open the windows, but you will feel it. It will really like give you a headache, and it's not good to inhale those vapors. And even if you're using a odorless mineral spirit or something, you're still inhaling fumes. So um, just always, like, first rule always is to have a window open. Now, I know some of you probably won't be working with oils today. You'll probably just work with acrylics, and that's perfectly fine. Um, but I thought, why not go ahead and use oils? And I'm also going to work on paper today. Hi, Lisa. Hey, Wekar. Nice to see both of you. Um, Yeah, thanks for joining. I wasn't sure who could make it today. I know, the last couple weeks have been kind of chaotic for me, so it's nice to do this and kind of recenter um, and bring it back. These videos often inspire me in my own practice, so it's nice to do them. And that's why I chose to do some oils today, because I haven't worked with oils in my studio in a while, and I just kind of want to do that. So, but I work with oils. One of the things I talked about in my last video about oil painting is that things don't dry quickly. So a good habit to get into if you're going to work with oils is to work on more than one piece at a time so you can let things dry. Hey, Jamie. Yay. So today I actually prepared a couple of surfaces. So what I'm using, this is paper that is primed for oils. And you can just type it into your Google and something will come up. I believe actually technically it's primed for oil pastels, but still it's primed for a material that has petroleum products in it so that it's not going to rot out. If you're just painting on regular paper with oils, that's going to happen over time. Your paper is going to just like kind of get holes in it because the oil will eat through it. So you want to have a paper that's primed for oil specifically. What I did is I just cut a couple pieces and I actually taped it down like this. And this is probably a good habit to get into if you're going to work with paper in general. I know I don't really do it when I'm using acrylics, but what it does, it first of all, it keeps your paper flat. It also makes a nice margin for you, like a nice border. And it's just sort of easy to then frame it without a problem. So it's always a good habit to get into. I tend to not take the time to do that because I'm usually just doing studies. But yeah, so today I prepared two surfaces, and this is just basic paper. It's paper that's primed, it's arches, and it's primed for oil or acrylic. And if you don't have that, what you can do is you can take any kind of paper, really, but it's recommended that you use 140-pound watercolor paper or heavier. And then what you can do is prime that with gesso. They say to use 3 coats of gesso. on either side of the paper. That is a lot of work and a lot of drying time. It's a lot of commitment. If you're working today and you happen to have some oil paints on you, something you can try doing is actually painting on top of an acrylic painting. Like I have this on hand because I might paint on top of this. This is like a little study, a little landscape study in acrylic. And the reason why is acrylics, the polymers will get into the pores of the paper, and it prepares the surface that way so you can paint with oils and it won't rot through the paper. Hey Liz, hey Joanne, thanks for saying hi. So that's what I have. I have two pieces. I have two papers primed. If I really need to grab like a canvas or something, I have that as well. But yeah, I recommend if you are going to work with oils, have a few surfaces, have at least two, but maybe more surfaces on hand that you can use. Now for me today, I'm just going to be playing around, showing you like how to work with different viscosities of the paint. I don't have any particular images in front of me, or I didn't have anything in mind except that I would paint like some fun materials from my studio, like things I just like, you know, these objects that I really enjoy painting. So that's probably what's going to happen. Like that might emerge out of what I do today. I want to talk a little bit about different mediums. I touched on this in my video a couple weeks ago, but I will get into it a little bit more. I might try out some of this Torrid Gray I talked about last week. So we'll just see where this goes. I really don't know. But before I go any further, if you're watching in the future or now, if you want to give a thumbs up on this video, that would be great. If I share any links today, I will include those in the video description below. All right, so let's see. When you're painting, again, if you were here and you saw the video I made a couple weeks ago, this is probably going to be a review, but I feel like for oils, it's always good to get the review. You know, the way I learned oils was like I took a class and the teacher said, here, put this stuff out and just play around with it and just use it. And he didn't give us any other instruction. And we were like, what's going on? And it was before the internet. We couldn't research anything. So I like to, you know, if you've heard this already, sorry, but okay, so you're going to need something for your brushes. This would act instead of water if you're working with acrylics. This is what you're going to use because oils are not water-based. Water will not clean an oil brush, so you need a solvent. And I really like this product, Gamsol by Gamblin. No, I'm not sponsored by them, but I like Gamblin products a lot. So this is a nice, clean, odorless mineral spirit. So what I do when I use this is I will put it into a container like this, and I'll use it up all day, and then at the end of the day, wipe my brushes out, put a lid on it, and let it settle. And this one's been sitting for a while, and what happens is you can pour out the top of it. It will separate, and you can pour that into another container, and then you have these sediments, these pigments at the bottom. And what I do is I'll take a paper towel and I'll wipe this out and just toss that, because you don't want to throw any of these things down the drain. They're a little bit toxic, so I avoid putting anything down the drain. So something I talked about last week is Gamblin, when they manufacture their paints, they'll take all of their leftover sediment like this, and then they'll make a new, like a paint, like their own paint tube each year, and it's called Torrid Gray. And every year it's slightly different. And I remember one year it was like this really warm, beautiful gray, so gorgeous. It's always slightly different each year, and it's really cool, but I haven't gotten the latest one. So I'm putting on gloves also because I don't like to touch these oil products. So I always wear gloves when I'm working with oil paints. And some people will use gloves when they're working with acrylics as well, but I don't do that. Okay, so I'm gonna just like wipe out this sediment here that's settled. Um, and then I can put this container aside and use it, you know, when I pour this out again. So you can just keep reusing that solvent. So I just put that off to the side. I'm going to put a little bit more of this out in my container just for brush cleaning purposes. Not a lot, just an inch of it. You know, when you're working with acrylics, you want to have a whole container, but with this stuff, you don't need to do it. Just a little bit is fine. I mean, if you're making a huge painting, maybe you would put out more. And then also I will have a tray or a lid, and I'll put a little bit of this in the tray because I'm going to use this to mix into my paints. And I just kind of like to keep it a little bit separate from the stuff that I clean my brushes with. All right. I've got some pigments out already, but I think they've kind of dried. So I'm going to do some more. And I think for today, we'll just try to keep it simple. We could just stick to yellow, red, blue, brown, since those are the colors. I tend to just tell people to get those colors. So that's some more yellow. I go through yellow and white very quickly. Yeah, those are the colors. I go through my light colors a little bit faster. Let's see. I have a lot of different reds, but for today, just stick with alizarin crimson, I guess. I have some here. And then whatever kind of dark blue you have. Okay, question. Is it strong smelling? The paint or the solvent? The solvent is odorless. However, it's not that it still affects you if you breathe it in. And I mentioned this last time. Odorless in some ways can be a little bit even more scary. Not scary, but be cautious. Just because you're not smelling it doesn't mean you're not inhaling it. So there's a slight odor to it. And there's a slight odor to oil paints in general. Like if you ever walk into a gallery, sometimes you can smell. There's a very distinct oil paint smell. It's a really wonderful smell. But if you're working around it all day, definitely keep the windows open. Like rule number one, keep the windows open. Even in the middle of winter, keep the windows open. Okay, Jamie, do you wash brushes with soap and water after the solvent? Yes, at the end of my session, you know, what will happen with me is I'll be painting for a few hours, and oil brushes are a lot harder to clean off than acrylics. So I usually just keep grabbing new brushes. So by the end of a session, I'll have like 10 brushes that have paint on them in some form. So yeah, I'll try to get the solvent out I'll get as much of the color out in the solvent as I can and wipe that off. Then I have a special soap for paint brushers called the Masters, I think, and I'll use that. And I will wash with that. Sometimes if I'm really lazy, I just, some people will leave them in the solvent overnight. I don't like to do it because I think it degrades the bristles. But if I'm really lazy, I'll just like put a little bit of my medium on the bristles and wrap it up in plastic. Like if I know I'm gonna start painting the next day, um, you know, you can leave it a little while before you clean it. I hope that answers your question, but I won't use regular soap. I'll use this special artist soap. Maybe I should grab it for you. Because it has a conditioner in it, and so it keeps the bristles just like better, I don't know, conditioned. So I have a huge tub of this stuff. Like, you know, and what I'll do, so you'll get this, you can get a big thing of it like this, or you can get a little cake of it. And I would say just get a little cake to start out with. Unless you know you work with oils a lot, then you know go ahead. I mean, it's more economical to get a big one. And you can see there's like some funk in there. So what I'll do is I'll get some water and I'll scumble it around in here, grab a little bit, and then do it on my palm like that, and then clean it off as best as possible. But it usually takes a few times because for me, my brushes tend to get really loaded with a lot of color. You know, everyone's a little bit different with that, but even if I get out all like as much material as possible in the solvent, there'll still be a lot of remnant left, and that soap is really good for oil brushes. So I hope that answered your question. But I mean, I'm gonna say like sometimes cleaning the brushes takes longer than making the painting. Like it's cleaning the brushes is a lot of work, I think. And if it isn't a lot of work, you might be doing something wrong. I don't know. Cool. All right, so let's see. Let's give ourselves some paint. So we have yellow. I put some red down, put a dark blue down. Certain colors you'll notice will stay wet longer. Dark colors tend to stay, is it dark colors stay wet a little bit longer than light colors? I'm not sure if that's, or if it's reverse, but like I have a bunch of paints on here that have kind of scabbed over a little bit, but I'm gonna just put some new color down. So I'll put a little bit of phthalo blue, and then I'll use a dark brown. But in general, I like to have at least a couple of reds, a couple of yellows, even some oranges. I was saying last week my favorite pigment is transparent orange. It's called. It's just a really beautiful. I can't find it. It doesn't look like much out of the tube, but then it just opens up into this really wonderful, warm color. So if your pigments are new to you, you might even just try, you know, maybe what we'll start with is just doing some washes with our pigments, where we'll use just our solvent and some paint. So you can just see what the pigments look like when they open up. So you could take I'm just going to take a pretty basic flat brush. And let's see, I'll do this. So I'm going to use my solvent. And so this is that transparent orange, so you can see that. And there's what it looks like when it's on the paper. It's just a really nice warm orange. Now, working on this paper, it's slightly more porous than if I was going to work on a canvas or a panel. It's a lot more like working with watercolor paint. But whatever you're working on today, I would say just experiment with this to start with just the solvent and the paint. And I mean, you can see, you can really take these, a little bit goes a long way with oils. They are more expensive if you buy them by the tube, but a little goes a long way. You might even, be careful with your solvent. And again, like I said, please, if you're using a lot of solvent, have a window open, have a fan going. See, even that, like it took all the pigment from my brush right there. I'm going to grab a little bit of alizarin crimson so you can see what that looks like in the solvent. But a lot of this is similar to, like I said, is similar to working with watercolor, except this will probably stay pretty wet for a while. I haven't worked on this paper in a long time, so I can't say how long it will stay wet. If this was canvas, it would probably stay wet like this for another couple of hours. But if you're using just like a stain like this, so a transparent pigment, like alizarin crimson is a transparent pigment, transparent orange is a transparent pigment. You can always build into this with other paints. Let's try some. I'm going to try some of this burnt umber so you can see what that's like. And yeah, you can just play around with staining your canvas if you want. I'm going to grab a little blue here. So it's generally advised with oils that you don't use your light colors right off the bat, that you build up to your light colors. And the reason is that if you go light right away, maybe I'll try this. Actually, I didn't even put any white down. It's going to stay wet for so long that you won't be able to to darken it if you have to. Let's see, I'll put some white out. So if you've ever worked with, I'm going to use a little bit of white. Let's say I come right in here with the white. Like now it's kind of gotten chalky. And if I ever want to darken that, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. If it was acrylics, I'd say just wait, let it dry, and then you can go in and go a little darker. But since this is oils, it takes longer to dry, so it can be a little bit harder to darken right off the bat. It really depends on what you're going for. The rule I always learned was don't use a lot of white right in the beginning. Kind of build up to it. Start with these more transparent layers and then work into these lighter, more opaque layers. But you can, experiment with scratching through this. Nothing's working here. Oh, here that's working. This is just basic charcoal. I just really love the surface of paper. It's really fun to work with. So this is a Conte crayon, which is partially wax crayon and believe it's wax and charcoal. So it will blend in that solvent. And if you're working with oil pastels, those should also blend in the solvent. There's also a product, there's a thing called oil bars, which I haven't really used a lot of, but those also will blend. So you can see that's blending really nicely. So a fun thing you could try doing is make a drawing if you have this Conte crayon. And this should work with charcoals as well. If you draw right into the solvent, you'll get a really nice effect with that. And then you can see about blending it. So yeah, if you have any charcoals or anything like that on hand, you might play around with blending those into your paint as well. So this isn't always how I start a painting, just so you know. This is more just to demonstrate the products with you, but I like what's happening here. So yeah, just keeping an open mind with it. I really am liking this Conte crayon for this particular material. I don't really use this with acrylics. I'm going to try a little bit of my Tauric Gray. This is an old bottle, so I don't even know. I'm struggling with opening it, so. Okay. The other thing you want that I didn't talk about is you want to have something handy. Look at how gorgeous that is. That you can wipe your brushes on. And I have like a big sheet over here. You can use old pillowcases or something. I mean, you can use paper, but there's something about like fabric that holds up a little bit better. And sometimes that's needed with oils, but you find your own thing you like. Don't be afraid with oils to get really dark, especially in the beginning, because you can always lighten it up. I'm going to mix my Tauric Gray with some red. And if you are familiar with watercolors, you can apply a lot of the same techniques and approaches at this stage with your oils. So you might just do a whole oil painting that's like this, that's just very transparent, thin layers. Be aware things will bleed out when you're working this loosely. It's not unlike working with acrylics, like very fluid acrylics. It's just that this is still wet. And if I was working with acrylics, some of this would probably be dry by now. So you can experiment with lifting things if you need to. Since the paper is slightly porous, it's going to absorb some of the color, but if you're on canvas, you should be able to just lift it right off. But this is all up to you. I'm going to work a little bit thicker on top of this now. So I could just take like some white with a little bit of solvent, you know, maybe mix a little yellow into it, a little orange, let's say. I could just do that and work on top of my painting with that. You can also experiment with adding a medium to your paint. So you can use your solvent, which would be equivalent to your water if you're working with acrylics, and then also add medium, which would be equivalent to like your acrylic medium. So last week I talked about how I really like this product, Neo McGill. It's this sort of jelly-like product. It's really versatile. You can do all kinds of things with it. It is yellow like this, but it dries a little bit more clear. And it also prevents your colors from yellowing, actually. And what that does when you mix it into your paints, it kind of gives it this sort of like juicy, like a little bit of a juicier mark. Just has like a little bit of a different consistency. So maybe you can see that. It's a little bit thicker. Instead of using like a ton of paint to get that thicker stroke, you can just use the medium for it. Now, different mediums will do different things. And when in doubt, just read the label. So I pulled a couple of different mediums that I have to show you the differences between them. So with this product, this was a sample, for example, Galkyd Light. On the label, it says it leaves, okay, Galkyd Light painting medium is ready to use and lighter, so it leaves brush marks. Good for painting outdoors, excellent for glazing. Thin layers dry within 24 hours. Diluted no more than 50-50 with OMS. OMS is that the solvent that I showed you. Consider decanting it into small, clean containers with no airspace so it won't dry out. Now, I've had this sitting on my shelf for years, and I have no idea what condition it is in, and I don't think I even want to use it. But some mediums will dry a little bit faster, some will dry slower, and it will usually say it on the bottle. This is a blending and glazing medium by Winsor Newton, a different company, and this says slows the drying rate of oil. Developed for painting techniques and can be used like a 1-2-4 medium for blending, glazing, stroke work, antiquing, and glazing. It's very fluid. so it will thin your paint down a lot. And then certain mediums will also speed up the drying rate. So a lot of these mediums now come like this. When I first started painting, it was like you took linseed oil, you took Damar varnish, and you took a couple drops of your solvent and put it together, and that was your medium. And now there's all these like manufactured mediums, and I find this one works the best for me, like for glazing and for building up layers and texture. Another fun thing to try if you like a lot of texture in your paint is this wax medium. It's really thick. It's cold wax. And you can mix it into your oil paint with some of the solvent, and it makes your paint really thick. I'll go ahead and use a little bit of it. Like you can see, it's really thick like that. I usually use it with like a credit card or something when I use this stuff. And it can make your paints kind of chalky and dull looking. But here, I'll show you. I just put some solvent in there and I'm kind of like mixing it all together. Just a little bit of this. See, it makes the paint thicker. So you can get like a lot of texture with something like that. Sometimes it takes a while to dry also. So yeah, this is a pretty fun, like gives it a kind of buttery consistency. But a lot of times if you see a painting where there's like a lot of paint on the surface, like lots of it, they probably just use paint right out of the tube. You know, and if you want to work that way, if you want like a lot of thickness, a lot of like, you know, yumminess to your paint, you just got to be ready to commit to working with a lot of product out of the tube, and that starts to get expensive. So yeah, that was pretty fun too. That's called cold wax medium. I think one of the things about oils is that it's easy to overwork it. So if you find yourself like getting in there and blending and blending and blending and everything's kind of dulling down, maybe just put it aside, let it dry, and then come back to it, or let it just set up a little bit and then come back to it. Or, you know, sometimes I'll take a credit card and just scrape a bunch of stuff off. So I'm going to come back to this one. I'm going to go ahead and just begin again. I don't want to try to save this right now. All right, so I am going to work on doing a more intentional painting of a still life. So I'll do this. What I'll do first is maybe start with I'll actually go ahead and start with a stain again. And I will just use, I think I just want to use like brown, maybe a little bit of yellow. So I'm going to use a big wash brush like this so I can get a lot of coverage. I feel like I'm doing a makeup tutorial. Yeah. So sometimes I'll do this step, like I'll stain my canvas with acrylic paint, let it dry, and then paint on top of it. Sometimes I don't want like the fuminess of the solvent, so I'll just use acrylics. If you are going to use acrylics, though, you really want to make sure that paint has set up and, you know, you've waited a couple days for it to set up. But I really like to work very loosely with the oils rather than super tight. Um, so I'm just gonna leave it like that. Since I enjoyed this Conti cream so much, maybe I will go ahead and, let's see, draw my composition. You know, the truth is I don't really use this Conti crayon usually, but just today I'm discovering how much I'm enjoying it. Usually I will just go in with a paintbrush and start painting um, my thing, my image. And I'm the kind of person, you probably have noticed, I tend to do a pretty loose drawing to start with, and then I'll make corrections as I go. But, um, you know, sometimes that can cause a lot of struggle. So if that sounds really painful to you, you might want to get your drawing correct right from the start. I kind of like the journey of trying to figure it out as I'm going. Um, but, you know, we're all different. I'll go ahead and just paint in. Um, I used to always take alizarin crimson for my base drawing or my base painting, like this framework here, because I just love the way that red would bleed into the other layers. So that was my default. I would always start like every painting with alizarin crimson. Years ago, I have broken out of that trend, um, but yeah, I just really like how it can bleed like that, and then maybe like little bits of that are left over in the final painting. I do think having some experience with acrylics is really good if you're going to move into oils. It's really good to have that experience because they are similar to each other. So then, similar to my oil, or sorry, if I was doing this in acrylics, I would start to block in different colors. So, and I would try to use white as little as possible for now, just because, like I said, once you put that white down, it's hard to come back from it. So I avoid using white right off the bat. So usually the first couple stages of my painting will be a little bit darker like this. I did just put a tiny touch of white into my purple. I mixed red and blue together to get purple, and I put just a tiny touch of white in it just so I could see what was happening because it's so dark otherwise, but really just a little bit. And at this point, I'm mixing a combination of solvent and the medium. I'm mixing a tiny bit of white into to get this color for my can here. I mixed blue and brown together. Yeah, don't be afraid to just let it be really fluid. Sometimes we're really scared to let our paint kind of go out on its own, but just see what happens if you just let it kind of do its thing for a little while. Okay. And then maybe I'll put this container back here. I'm seeing. I mean, there's still a lot of like flexibility with oils. It's not like you're, once you put that mark down, you're stuck with it. You can always make changes as you go. Sometimes if you force a change though, you can lose like the freshness of the painting. So sometimes you gotta, that's when I talk about like listen to what the painting wants rather than trying to force it in a certain direction. I think I'll just go ahead and do that. So there is a term, I'm completely forgetting the name of it. And if someone knows it, you can type it into the chat. But it's when you paint wet into wet, alla prima, maybe. I love the fluidity. I always thought of oils as being thick and claggy. No, they're super fun. I know people will use them right out of the tube and they'll be really dry with them, but yeah, you can do so much. So this one has been sitting here for a while, and this is why you might want to wait sometimes when before you paint. Like things like that will happen. Like gravity pulled some of the solvents down and created this texture. And I will sometimes I'll preserve that as I'm building up layers. I'll try to preserve an element of that, um, like not paint over that because it's kind of fun to see that happening, that dripping happening. Um, so just a little thing, like if you let these sit for a while, um, before you start painting with more layers on top, you'll see like the turp doing even more, like, you know, blending out or, um, going on its own. Like, especially if you hold it upright, um, over time, you'll see some dripping happening. Yeah, I really like the fluidity too. I really just always like playing with the materials and not trying to force the painting too much. And yeah, I'll usually just wait for things to dry and set up, but you could use a paper towel and kind of dry it off. I don't love that though, because now I'm like blotting out my entire painting. But if it helps you to keep things under control, and sometimes, especially with paper, it can be kind of fun to sort of use these watercolor techniques. I kind of like that though too. So I think I will blot out some of the lighter areas. Especially when you start using colors, like when you start discovering pigments that you really like. Like I said, that transparent orange, I just love it so much. There's also like quinacridone magenta that's really nice for just sort of like spreading it out on the page. All right. So yeah, I keep grabbing new brushes because the other ones have so much pigment in them, it's going to be hard to clean them out. So yeah, I'll go ahead now and use a slightly different brush and just build up a little bit on my um, metal container here, my brush container. So I'm going to use a little more a little more solvent. This is my solvent right here, this kind of jelly. I'm going to use a little bit more of that. And I have this wax medium here. So I'm just going to use some of that and see what happens to thicken up the paint a little bit. And then you can work with that on top and see what it does. Now I'm working flat. If you're working upright, you might want to wait for the fluids to dry a little bit. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to wait with that one. Just so it sets up a little bit more. I am going to take some white here and go ahead and paint on my glue bottle. So yeah, there's lettering here that, let's say I wanted to do this red lettering. If I tried it right now while this paint is still really wet, it's just gonna turn pink. I won't get a nice contrast. I'm gonna try it out. I don't have a good brush. Let's see here. And yeah, I like to keep my acrylic brushes separate from my oils. I mean, you can interchange them, but the oils, fragments of the oil will stay in the bristles. Actually, this isn't turning out that bad, that red. So yeah, actually okay. You just don't want to go overboard with your light pigments right off the bat with oils. And start with a stain, start looser and then build up into uh, thicker pigments. I think you can control your paint a little bit easier that way. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to go to ask since we're at the end of the hour here. I think next Monday I would like to do a landscape with oils. So that's what I'm going to plan on doing. And of course, you can work with oils along with me or just work with your acrylics. Either way is fine. If I finish this painting, I will put a link in the description below to the finished product. So you can always go down there and check and see, is it done? Did I finish it? Did I continue working on this? I do not know the answer to that yet. And if I'm feeling really ambitious, maybe I will do a video just finishing this up. So if that happens, I'll post a link to that as well. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye, unless there's any questions about products, materials, technique, anything. Feel free to ask. I'll hang out for another couple of minutes. Yeah, so cool to witch. That's what it looks like, Liz. That's what it looks like you wrote. Thanks. Yeah, and if you have some old acrylic paintings, try painting on top of your acrylic paintings also. I'll often use oils to get more detail in an acrylic painting. Paulette, thanks. So interesting. Can't wait to try it. I hope you do. Definitely just start with those basic, the blue, red, yellow, brown, white pigments. And then from there, you can build on that and try out other different colors for sure. Yes, to video finishing this piece. Would love that. Okay, great. What would you say is an advantage of oils versus acrylics? It's a great question. I think in many ways, the oils, for me, when I'm painting, I tend to get a more luscious, vibrant painting when I'm working with oils. And I don't know if that's the pigments. I don't know if it's the way I handle the paint. I don't know what it is, but I personally find my paintings tend to be a little bit, the surface of them I like a little bit more um, than oils or than acrylics. I think acrylics are actually more advantageous in a lot of ways because they're easier to clean up, they're not as fussy, these days you can get a huge range of colors. um, they dry faster, so sometimes the drying rate can be a real make or break thing for people. Some people really don't like how acrylics dry so quickly, and so they want to like play with their surfaces more, do more blending, and you can really do that with oils. Um, I need to think about it more, but I would say I think acrylics are just less fussy in general because you don't have to deal with like the ventilation, the gloves, all of that. But there's just a really fun challenge about oils that I really like. I think people like the traditional aspect of them, like the fact that they are like an older paint form. I think they're both really wonderful and great. And like I said, I will often start a painting with acrylics and finish it off with oils. Um, yeah, I know that's not, I mean, I need to think about that more, but there's something just really fun about working with oils that I really enjoy. But yeah, if I had to answer that question off my head, it seems like acrylics just are easier, less fussy paints. All right, that's a great question, and I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to maybe come back next week with a better response. But hopefully that helped. Um, okay, everyone, thanks so much. This was fun. Thank you so much for painting along with me, and let's work on a landscape next week, a beautiful springtime landscape. Okay, have a nice week, and keep checking the channel to see if I post a part 2 to this. I'll try to get that done for you. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.